Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit of story of self. Virginia's going to start, and then I'm going to follow.
Sure. By way of hands, how many of you all had, growing up, an emergency plan, like an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, depending where you, yeah? Show of hands? Well, for some of us, our emergency plans were our deportation plans. Having grown up in a mixed status household, for me, just who I am and my worldview is defined by this experience. And why I feel very privileged to do the work I do at the James Irvine Foundation, because I get to support organizations that do this work. But I also feel a sense of responsibility and a sense of urgency. And quite frankly, I don't really share this story very much, because as funders, we're told ourselves is not what, right? We do our grant making, it's about our grantees, it's about their voice. So it's a little uncomfortable, and I see a lot of my peers who don't even know that story. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my story. And this came from Aparna, who really wanted to do this. So I'll turn it over to Aparna.
This is Mobilize the Immigrant Vote in action, because we can't actually do this work either if we're not in our bodies and we're integrated in our minds, bodies, and spirits. And we also can't do it unless we're connected to everything that came before us and everyone that's going to come after us. So those are our parents up there. I came to this country when I was 6 as an immigrant, also grew up in a mixed status family, also grew up knowing that my cousins and uncles and aunties, simply by way of how we came here, some of them always had to worry about whether they could be here and who else from our family could join, whereas my nuclear family got to all be here. And my son, interestingly, because of my partner, is both the son, grandson, and great-grandson of immigrants across all sides, and then also is part Native, and so carries that in him in everything he does. So that's a little bit about who we are. Mobilize the Immigrant Vote. So there is our mission. Essentially, we are two different networks. We're Mobilize the Immigrant Vote Alliance, as well as the Young Voter of Color Network, and we're two different networks. We span about 30 organizations on the ground. We work primarily with Latinx, Black African, and Asian Pacific Islander groups on the ground that are led by immigrants, refugees, and young people of color. And we really believe in racial justice and gender justice, and really looking at the intersections of all of who we are. And we're not just mobilizing people to vote, we're mobilizing people whether or not they can vote, whether or not they're documented, in the idea that we are all part of making change and making really deep structural change in this country. We're also really focused on millennials of color and folks that are first-time registered, or folks that are coming out to vote for the first time. And this year, we're looking at touching about 200,000 immigrants, refugees, and young people of color directly through voter reg, voter education, and turning them out to vote in 12 different languages across those different communities, and also have a sister C4 organization and a PAC. So in this moment, what to say about the political landscape around immigrant and refugee justice? There is so much, and last night was further evidence. So this administration clearly is trying to end all the immigration and refugee and protections that we have and dismantle them and send us back multiple generations. At the national level, we know that DACA, we are now waiting for February 9th to see if there will be some protection for dreamers included in the spending bill. And every single week that goes by that young people that have DACA where it's not extended, 850 more young people are losing protections and are open for deportation. We also know that the temporary protected status for refugees, as of January of 2017, we had over 420,000 refugees from 10 countries that were protected here in this country. Under this administration, over 70,000 people already have lost that, and we know that that is going to continue. As we are looking at this fight to save DACA, we also need to be saving TPS, and we also need to be looking at our whole communities, our whole families, and all of who we are, and not just be segmenting across who we can protect and who we're not going to protect. The other concern that is happening at the national level is a potential for the very specific and targeted undercounting of immigrants, which particularly here in California could lead to us losing a congressional seat, and it could really impact us in terms of losing our budget and using our power here in California. In here, we are seeing, and Bay Resistance will talk a little bit more specifically about that, at the state and local level, we're certainly seeing that there is a lot of resistance across the administration's fight to really tamp down on sanctuary cities, particularly with these mass raids that we're seeing. On the other side of it here in California, what we're also seeing is an opportunity. The One California Immigrant Services funding, we've been able to sustain that at $45 million, which is the same as last year, which also includes $3 million for undocumented, unaccompanied minors. We're also seeing the fight that we recently won around extending Medi-Cal for undocumented young people to be able to actually extend that for undocumented adults is something that is continuing. There is also there's also a number of different issues that we'll talk about on the local level, but so that gives you a sense of the landscape that we are fighting and what we're pushing for. But now let's look at some of the demographics and what it is that where the opportunities lie for where we can go. So here in California, the foreign-born population of immigrants, and this is certainly undercounted, is about 27%. If you look at what immigrants and refugees are contributing to the California's annual GDP, it's over $650 billion. And then in LA County alone, we know that the children of immigrants and immigrant children make up 66%. Here in California, 1 in 3 children can say that we have an immigrant parent. So part of our focus around young people and millennials of color, some of you may already know these statistics. There are 4 million potential young voters of color here in California. Over 50% of them come from immigrant and refugee families, and about 70% of millennials are African American, Latinx, or Asian Pacific Islander. However, the registration figures for young people of color here are much, much lower than the rest of the population. While those are about 70%, they're at 52%. So, hence there is big opportunity, both in terms of building power, certainly at the ballot boxes, but much broader in terms of structural power and big change. In 2014, we saw that of foreign-born voters, they were about 19% of voters registered, and we also saw them turn out at about 16%. That was in the primaries. However, if you look at 2016 numbers, we actually saw that foreign-born voters were about 19% again of the voters and turned out at that full 19%. So if you look at native-born versus foreign-born, there is a higher turnout rate amongst immigrants who are actually born in different countries. Some of the opportunities that we're really excited about is we have some key ballot measures that are coming around Proposition 13, around potential rent control, around potential college for all. We have some of the legislative measures that I was talking about earlier around extending funding and being able to really commit around undocumented voters. We have an opportunity to continue to build infrastructure, as some of the earlier speakers have talked about, which certainly includes what we're building structurally. It also includes the narrative and cultural infrastructure for really shifting hearts and minds in a very, very deep way. And then we certainly, as everyone has talked about, there is a deep need for us to be talking about what we're governing for and what it is that we are building towards. So the piece around the dreaming in public and making sure that when we are looking at the solutions for DACA, that doesn't include border militarization, that it doesn't include the separation of adults and families who then either can't come over or stay here, and that when we're looking at temporary protected status and things like that, that includes all of our countries, whether folks are coming from African countries or what have you. So the opportunity here is for us to really build the bigger we, and as we said, to be really leading with vision and to look at transforming in a way that includes all of who we are.
So I'm a senior program officer at the James Irvine Foundation, and we're a statewide funder. Last year we made $83 million in grants. We're the largest California-focused multi-issue foundation. And part of our grant making has gone towards immigrant integration and what we're now calling, and what we've pivoted to, which is protecting immigrant rights, which is intended to be more responsive and flexible resources. So our response at this time in trying to support immigrant rights organizations, right after the election in 2016, we did a slew of about close to $2 million in core support grant to our grantees that we knew we were going to be in the front lines. We just said, we don't know what's coming, but something is coming. You know, here's some additional resources. And in 2017, what we decided to do is go out in the field and start listening to our grantees and starting to do convenings with folks to help inform kind of a larger strategy. And through that process, again, core support, I think it's a theme that I keep hearing, and really making sure that while we're providing core support, that we also provide additional funding for capacity and infrastructure, particularly at a time where a lot of these organizations feel like they might be under attack. And lastly, one of the things our CEO did was convene a group, an informal group of his peers to talk about what they can do differently. And basically, we've been convening for over a year, both at a CEO staff level, identified needs and gaps, deployed close to $40 million in new funding. It's not enough for the field, and we know that. So they've actually collectively had decided to do call to action. So there's been letters, and there's a Chronicle and Philanthropy piece a couple of weeks ago around there is a need here that we need to kind of have more funding to build capacity, but across the board, right? So it's just not the immigrant rights, but it's also kind of emergent issues that folks are working on in the field. And I'll quickly just go through this. I think like Kong, I think you suggested sort of provide core support, listen to the field. When you listen to the field, you will get to like hear people want to experiment and want to be supported for that. So just keeping an open mind, align and coordinate with others when possible, support long-term and immediate needs, and support organizations with sustainability. So the resistance is strong. I think one of the things as funders, we tell people all the time, this is not a right or a left issue. This is an issue about California's values of inclusion, diversity, and equity. At the end of the day, it's about protecting those values. So again, this is about families, people, and communities. So I think we always, we're very mindful kind of the politics. But let me conclude by reading a letter of a DACA person to his peers after the last DACA debacle that I feel like I'm posting in my wall for inspiration. We have always faced incredible odds at times that have paralyzed loved ones around us. This is why we must continually remind each other that we are the answer to the prayers of our ancestors, and that those prayers are with us because those prayers are eternal. As such, we understand that our mission is to wholeheartedly and consistently generate positive possibilities from a place of love and not from a place of fear in the face of seemingly chaotic systems that have always been against us. Through this mindset and heart set, collectively, we have and we will succeed to change the impossible to the possible. These words from this young man, I mean, he could have easily said, I'm done, or I'm just gonna focus on myself and do self-care. He wrote this letter to other DACA folks. And to me, it's such a reminder about the resiliency in community. And for us funders, how do we listen and support this resiliency? And so I just leave you with that. And as a funder, I know that we do have power, but I also know that you have allies who are constantly trying to push the systems that we're in to be more responsive to the field. Thank you.